The smell of those white flowers was everywhere. Heavy, sweet, almost sickly, like the kind of perfume you smell at a funeral. My fingers were shaking around the bouquet I was holding. Everything I had on that day was borrowed. The organ music kept playing, filling that huge stone church, getting louder and louder. But the man I was supposed to marry was nowhere. Not at the altar, not anywhere. Every note from that organ felt like it was blaming me. Every second of silence from the guests behind me felt like a knife going right between my ribs. I checked my phone, hiding it inside the flowers so nobody could see. The screen glowed with a notification that made my stomach drop. My bank account frozen, a federal hold. I could barely breathe. This wasn't just a man who didn't show up. This was something much, much worse. Elena, my assistant from the gallery, appeared right beside me. Her face was pale under all her makeup. She leaned in close and whispered that he wasn't coming. She had just talked to his best man. Marcus left a note. I didn't need to read it. I already knew something was deeply wrong the moment I walked into that church and felt it, that wrongness hanging in the air like smoke. The light through the stained glass windows was too sharp, too accusing. The guests, mostly Marcus's colleagues, collectors I had authenticated artwork for, gallery owners who had always looked down on me for being a scholarship kid. They were all watching me. Not just with pity, with something else too, something that looked like fear. Whispers spread through those wooden pews like wildfire. I caught pieces, the FBI outside. They're saying she was forging stolen art. Millions. My corset felt like it was slowly crushing my lungs. That high vaulted ceiling stretched above me, endless, suffocating. I had spent time restoring paintings in churches exactly like this one. Hours up on scaffolding, studying brushstrokes that were hundreds of years old. And now I couldn't even look up without feeling like the painted angels in the clouds were judging me too. Then a voice cut through all of it, cold, official, a man in a dark suit, not wed, in guest dark, but federal agent dark, stood at the end of the aisle. His hand rested near something at his hip. He said they needed me to come with them. Panic flooded through me like cold water. I started to say I didn't do anything, my voice cracking. I didn't know what Marcus had told them, but I hadn't done anything. The agent said this would go easier if I cooperated. And then the church doors exploded open. The sound hit the stone walls like thunder and bounced everywhere, killing every whisper, every breath in that room. Every single head turned at once. Even the federal agent froze where he stood. He walked in like a shadow that had learned how to wear skin. Tall, broad shoulders, 2 men flanked him on either side, their suits so perfectly cut they might as well have been armor. But it was the man in the middle who pulled every eye in that room. His suit was dark gray, the kind of fabric that whispers about serious money. His dark hair was swept back from a face that looked like it belonged on an old sculpture, all sharp angles and striking features. But it was his neck that made my stomach actually drop. Right above the collar of his dress shirt, black ink curled upward, the tail end of something bigger, something deliberately shown off. A serpent, a dragon, the tattoo of a boss, a man who ran things that didn't appear in newspapers. He walked down that aisle like a man who had never in his life been told no. His gaze moved over the crowd, the collectors, the agents, my terrified assistant, before it finally landed on me. Dark eyes, unreadable, the kind that felt like they could see through walls. I felt nailed to the floor like a butterfly pinned under glass. His guards fanned out through the church with the kind of smooth, practiced efficiency that only comes from doing something 1,000 times. One of them murmured into a radio. The federal agent's hand moved away from his weapon. His whole posture shifted from aggressive to cautious. The man stopped 3 feet in front of me, close enough that I could smell his cologne, cedar, and something darker underneath, something that made my pulse jump before my brain could tell it not to. He said my name, Elena Leonard. His voice was low and resonant. It turned my name into something almost dangerous. He said it like I should know who he was, when I showed no reaction, because I genuinely had no idea. Something flickered across his expression. Amusement, maybe. He introduced himself. His name was Daniel Voss, and the way he said it, like I should have already known, like everyone in a room eventually knows, made my skin prickle. He glanced at the empty space where Marcus should have been standing, then back at me. Something cold and hunting moved behind his eyes. He said my fiancé had worked for him. Indirectly, he said the word fiancé the way you'd say it with a sneer. He said Marcus owed him money, a serious debt. And Marcus had believed he could run from that debt and here Daniel's gaze traveled slowly over my dress, the flowers, the whole church, by creating distractions. The room had gone completely silent, so silent I could hear my own heartbeat. I said I didn't understand. But I was starting to. God help me, I was already starting to. He said Marcus had stolen from him. His voice stayed conversational, but steel lived underneath every word. $2 million worth of authenticated artwork that turned out to be extraordinary forgeries. Forgeries that carried my signature restoration technique. The blood left my face. I said I would never. He cut me off, and the certainty in his voice surprised me more than the accusation had. He said he knew I didn't. He said I was the tool, not the thief, which was exactly why he was standing there. One of the federal agents stepped forward, starting to say something about how this woman was wanted for questioning. Daniel didn't even glance at him. He reached into his jacket. Every agent in that room tensed, and he pulled out a leather portfolio. He handed it to the lead agent with the casual indifference of a man handing a servant a dismissed report. He told them they'd find that I was under his legal protection as of that morning. His team had filed an emergency motion in federal court 20 minutes ago. Prosecutorial misconduct. The warrant was suspended pending a hearing. Touch me, and they'd be in contempt of court. It had to be a lie. It absolutely had to be. But the agent's face as he scanned those documents told a completely different story. The agent said it was highly irregular. Daniel finally turned to face him fully, and even I felt the temperature in that room drop. His lawyers, he said, were very expensive. Did they want to test how irregular things could become? The agents pulled back toward a side exit. Not a full retreat, a tactical pause. They'd be back. Both of us knew it. Daniel turned back to me, and I was struck again by the weight of his attention. It felt like being truly seen for the first time. Every flaw, every fear, every desperate little hope laid completely bare under that dark gaze. He said my fiancé wasn't coming. His voice softened just slightly, not with pity, but with something far more dangerous, understanding. He said Marcus was never going to marry me. He said this whole ceremony was theater, a distraction. Well, he caught a flight with the money and left me holding the brush that had painted the forgeries. The bouquet slipped from my fingers, white petals scattered across the marble floor like snow falling on a grave. The debt remained, Daniel continued, his eyes never leaving mine. $2 million plus interest, plus the insult of believing he wouldn't notice. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried through the entire church. He said my fiancé had made me collateral in a game I didn't even know I was playing. I managed to say I didn't have that kind of money. I didn't have any money. I was an art historian. Daniel said he knew exactly who I was. The way he said my name sent heat racing up my spine, despite the fear coiling right underneath it. He knew about my scholarship. He knew about my graduate research on Renaissance painting techniques. He knew about the loan sharks circling my student debt. He knew about the gallery job I had lost because I refused to authenticate a forgery for a collector with dangerous connections. Every fact, he said, was another small violation, proof that he had been watching me, studying me, long before today. I breathed out one word, how. He said simply that he made it his business to know the value of things, and that I, Elena Leonard, was exceptionally valuable. One of his guards approached, murmuring something. Daniel nodded once, then turned his attention back to me. He said we didn't have much time. The federal agents were calling for backup, and their patience with his legal fiction was running thin. I asked what he wanted from me. The words came out sharper than I intended. Panic and anger finally finding a voice together. Daniel smiled. It was not a comforting expression. He said he wanted me to marry him instead. The world tilted. I heard gasps from the remaining guests, heard my assistant's shocked cry, heard the priest make a strangled sound of protest. But all I could focus on was this man in front of me, whose expression remained completely serious. I whispered that he was insane. He said he was pragmatic. He said my fiancé had left me to face federal charges for art fraud. The evidence against me was circumstantial but damaging. I could spend years fighting it. Even if I won, my career would be destroyed, my reputation gone. He stepped closer. The cedar scent again, mixed with something else. Danger and dark promises underneath. Or, he said, I could marry him right now, in front of all these witnesses, and the debt would be erased. I choked out one word. Why? Why would he possibly? He said because Marcus had made a critical mistake. Daniel's voice dropped lower, intimate enough that only I could hear it. He assumed I was just another pretty face with talented hands. But Daniel had watched me work. He had seen me identify a Caravaggio from a single brushstroke in a photograph. He had read my research on authenticating pigment degradation in works wrongly attributed to the old Flemish masters. His gaze held mine, and I felt the weight of everything he wasn't saying pressing between us. He said I wasn't collateral. I was the prize, and Marcus had been too stupid to understand that. My heart hammered against my ribs. This couldn't be real. This didn't happen in real life. Crime bosses didn't walk into churches and propose marriage to women they had never even met. Except he had met me, or at least he'd been watching me. For how long? I asked what happened if I said no. Though I already knew the answer, something cold and final settled across Daniel's face. He said he would collect the debt through other channels. Marcus had family assets. They would pay for his theft. His gaze moved toward the pews where an elderly couple sat frozen in horror. Marcus's parents, he said they were innocent in this, of course, but business was business. The threat wasn't even hidden. It was laid out like a contract, clear and merciless. I breathed that he was a monster. He agreed without even a moment's hesitation. He said he was a monster who was offering me a choice, which was more than my fiancé had done. This choice I would make with my eyes wide open. I placed my hand in Daniel Voss's. His palm was warm, calloused in unexpected places, not the soft hands of the art collectors I knew. These were the hands of someone who had actually built things, and defended them. His fingers closed around mine with a certainty that made my breath catch not from fear, but from something far more unsettling. Recognition, like my body understood something my brain was still refusing to accept. This man was going to change everything. I said yes, barely audible above the rushing in my ears. I said I would marry him. The church erupted. My assistant gasped. The priest stuttered. The federal agents moved forward, then stopped as Daniel's men shifted into position. But Daniel never looked away from me. His dark eyes held mine with an intensity that felt like a brand, marking me as his in ways that had nothing to do with the ceremony about to happen. He called out for the officiant. An older man stepped out from the shadows near the back of the church, dressed formally and carrying what looked like official paperwork. They needed witnesses. 2 of Daniel's guards stepped forward immediately without being asked. The priest of that church stood frozen, torn between his duty and his obvious terror. Daniel didn't force him. He simply waited, and the weight of that waiting was more compelling than any threat could ever be. The ceremony lasted less than 5 minutes. The officiant spoke formally, clearly, in measured words. I repeated things I barely heard. My entire awareness was fixed on the man beside me, whose thumb was drawing small, slow circles against my pulse point. Was he feeling how fast my heart was racing? Did he know that beneath all the fear and anger, something else was beginning to stir? Something that had no business existing in this moment of forced vows and federal surveillance. When the officiant pronounced us married, Daniel lifted my hand to his lips. The kiss he pressed to my knuckles was brief, almost gentle, but his eyes promised things that made heat pool low in my stomach despite everything around us. He murmured Mrs. Voss, and the name sounded like acclaiming. The federal agents approached as we signed the documents. The lead agent's face was tight with barely controlled fury. He said this changed nothing. They still had questions. Daniel said they could direct those questions to his attorneys. He produced a business card with the casual elegance of a man who had done it 1,000 times. His wife, he said, would not be speaking to anyone without legal counsel present. His wife, those words should have felt like chains. Instead, they felt like armor. The drive to Daniel's estate was silent. I sat in the back of a black car, watching the city give way to wide, manicured landscapes. Daniel sat beside me, close enough that I could feel the heat coming off his body, far enough that we weren't quite touching. But I was hyper-aware of every shift in his weight, every breath. Every moment his gaze slid toward me in the dark interior. He said I was afraid. It wasn't a question. I asked if he wouldn't be. He asked if I was afraid of him or of the situation. I said both. He said one of those was understandable. Then he asked which I was doing, being afraid or planning. I felt rather than saw his smile. He said fear without a plan was just paralysis. And I was smarter than that. We passed through iron gates that rose like the entrance to another world. The house sprawled before us, a mansion straight out of a Gothic novel, all dark stone and tall windows catching the last of the fading light. Gardens stretched in perfect geometric patterns. A fountain caught the sun, turning water into liquid gold. It was beautiful the way a very weld. A Zion trap is beautiful, carefully constructed, inescapable. The car stopped under a covered entrance. Daniel stepped out, then turned back and extended his hand to me. I hesitated. Once I stepped out of this car, once I crossed the threshold of his home, there was no going back. His hand stayed steady, patient, waiting, never forcing, which somehow made it impossible to refuse. I took it and I let him guide me into my new life. The inside of that house took whatever breath I had left. Marble floors stretched endlessly, veined with gold that caught the light from crystal chandeliers overhead. Art covered every wall, not the showy displays of someone who had recently gotten rich, but the careful curation of someone who truly understood beauty, someone who knew the difference between price and value. I recognized a Monet study, something that might have been an early Rothko, an ink painting that looked genuinely ancient. I breathed out that he collected. He said he acquired what he valued. His voice came from directly behind me, close enough that I felt his breath stir the curls at the back of my neck. And he said he protected what was his. The double meaning wasn't lost on me. I turned and found myself trapped between his body and a console table with a Ming vase on it. He didn't touch me, but his presence was a physical thing, overwhelming, inescapable. Up close in better light, I could see details I had missed back in the church. The tattoo that wound up his neck continued beneath his collar, disappearing into the expensive fabric. His jaw was sharp enough to cut, his lips surprisingly full, his eyes so dark they reflected my terrified face back at me like black mirrors. He said the master suite was on the 3rd floor, and for one terrible moment I thought he meant for us to share it. Panic must have shown clearly on my face because his expression shifted. Not quite amusement, but close to it. He said the East Wing had been prepared for me, my own rooms, my own space. The relief was so intense my knees actually weakened. He caught my elbow to steady me, and the touch burned through the fabric of my dress. He said he might be a monster, but not that kind. His thumb brushed the inside of my elbow, finding the pulse point there, and he knew. I could tell he absolutely knew when it jumped. He said I would come to him when I was ready, not before. I forced out the question, what if I was never ready? He leaned closer, his lips nearly brushing my ear, and said he would wait. He had been waiting years. He could wait longer, but he said, and his voice carried something absolute, that I would be ready sooner than I thought. He stepped back and released me. The sudden absence of his warmth felt like loss. A woman appeared middle-aged, dressed in elegant black. Daniel spoke to her quickly. and she bowed before turning to me with a warm smile that seemed completely genuine despite everything. She said her name was Miriam. She managed the household. She offered to show me to my rooms. I followed her up a sweeping staircase, acutely aware of Daniel's gaze tracking every step. When I finally dared to glance back, he stood at the base of the stairs, hands in his pockets, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Hunger, maybe, or patience, or both. The East Wing was a revelation. My suite wasn't just a room. It was an entire apartment. A bedroom with a 4-poster bed in silk. A sitting room with floor. The ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. A bathroom with a soaking tub carved from a single piece of marble. And then I stopped breathing. A study, filled with art books, conservation equipment, and a drafting table positioned to catch the perfect northern light. Miriam said gently that he had prepared this for me. He had hoped I would be comfortable. I was standing in a gilded cage that had been designed specifically around me, with bars made of beauty and consideration. It should have felt more suffocating than the church. Instead, it felt like being seen in a way Marcus had never managed in 3 years together. After Miriam left, I sank onto the bed and let myself shake. The adrenaline was crashing, leaving me hollow and raw. I had married a stranger, a criminal, a man who had been watching me for reasons I didn't fully understand. I should have been planning my escape, figuring out how to contact the authorities, doing something. Instead, I kept thinking about the way his thumb had traced my pulse, about the promise in his voice when he said I would come to him when I was ready, about the hunger in his eyes that made me feel like prey and prize all at once. A soft knock pulled me out of my spiral. I opened the door. Daniel was standing in the hallway, still in his wedding suit, holding 2 crystal glasses of amber liquid. He said I looked like I needed it. I took the glass because my hands needed something to hold besides the door frame I was gripping like a lifeline. The whiskey burned going down, sharp, smoky, grounding. I said I needed to know something, the alcohol giving me just enough courage. I asked about the marriage, when the investigation was over, when his debt was settled. Could I have it annulled? Something flickered in Daniel's expression. He moved to the window, looking out over his estate in the fading light. He looked almost otherworldly in that golden shadow. He said no. My heart stuttered. I asked what he meant. He said the wedding Marcus had arranged was never real. He turned to face me. He said the priest was an actor. The license was never filed. Marcus had wanted me arrested at the altar. Maximum humiliation, maximum distraction. While he boarded a flight with the money and left me holding all the evidence, he said Marcus never intended for me to actually become his wife. The glass slipped from my numb fingers. Daniel caught it before it hit the floor, moving with that unsettling speed, and suddenly he was close again. Too close, his hand on my wrist steadying me. He said he had brought a real officiant, filed real paperwork. Our marriage was the only legitimate thing that happened in that church today. His grip tightened fractionally. Not painful, inescapable. He said I wasn't Marcus's discarded bride. I was his wife, legal, binding. Real, the room spun. Everything I thought I understood shifted beneath my feet. Marcus hadn't just abandoned me. He had built an elaborate fiction designed to destroy me while he escaped, and Daniel had what? Saved me. Claimed me, both. I asked why. My voice broke on the word. Why would he do this? Daniel released my wrist. But his hand didn't move away. Instead, his fingers traced the delicate bones there, mapping them slowly, with a thoroughness that made my skin burn. He said because I was always meant to be his. Marcus was just an obstacle he should have removed sooner. I whispered that he was completely insane, but I didn't pull away. He agreed. He said yes, completely insane. But so was I. I just didn't know it yet. He stepped back and gave me space I wasn't sure I wanted anymore. He told me to rest. He said tomorrow they would start unraveling the web Marcus had built around me. Tonight I was safe. He left, pulling the door closed with a soft click that sounded exactly like a promise and a threat at the same time. I stood alone in my beautiful cage, touching my wrist where his fingers had been, and realized with crystal clarity that I believed him. For the first time in 3 years, I felt genuinely safe, and that terrified me more than anything else that had happened that entire day. 3 days passed in a strange, suspended kind of reality. I saw Daniel only at meals, breakfast in a sun-bright conservatory where orchids bloomed in wild, vivid colors, dinner in a formal dining room where we sat at opposite ends of a table built for 20. He never pushed, never demanded. He simply existed at the edge of my awareness like a dark star, whose gravity I could feel even when he wasn't in the room. Miriam gave me free rein of the estate. I drifted through it like a ghost, moving through halls lined with art that would make museum curators weep. But it was on the third night, unable to sleep, that I found the door. It was hidden behind an ornate screen in the library. A biometric lock that shouldn't have recognized my handprint but did. The door slid open with a whisper of hydraulics and a staircase descended into darkness. Every instinct I had screamed at me to turn around. Instead, I went down. The underground vault was a cathedral built entirely for art. Climate, controlled perfection, museum, grade lighting flickering on as I entered, and there, centered on the far wall like an accusation, hung a painting I knew intimately, because I had spent 6 months restoring it. A painting attributed to a minor follower of Caravaggio, except the painting I had worked on was supposed to be in a private collection in Boston. I approached with trembling hands, my conservator's eye cataloging everything. The brushwork was too confident for a follower, the contrasts too masterful, the skin tones too luminous. This wasn't a follower's work. This was the master himself, and I had missed it. Worse than that, I had cleaned away centuries of overpainting and protective varnish. I had revealed the master's hand underneath it, and I had never once realized what I was uncovering, because Marcus had fed me a narrative about provenance and attribution that I had swallowed completely. You think it's beautiful, don't you? I spun around. Daniel stood at the bottom of the stairs, dressed in dark training clothes that fit close. His hair damp like he had just finished a workout. The tattoos I had only glimpsed before were fully visible now. A dragon that wound from his neck, across his shoulder, and down his arm rendered in an intricate, traditional style, the scales so detailed they seemed to shift in the low light. I started to say I hadn't. He waved away my protest before I could finish. He said he had given me access. He had wanted me to find this. He moved toward me with that predatory grace I was starting to recognize. Stopped close enough that I could smell the clean scent of his soap underneath the faint warmth of his exertion. He told me to tell him what I saw. I said I saw a painting that shouldn't exist, my voice shaking with anger and awe in equal measure. I said I saw a painting I had restored without knowing what it actually was. I saw evidence that Marcus had played me for a fool. Daniel said I wasn't a fool. He gestured toward the painting. He said I had revealed a masterpiece with such care and such precision that even experts examining the restoration work found nothing suspicious. I had made the fake provenance believable because the work itself was flawless. The praise felt like acid poured on a wound. I said that made me complicit. He said it made me a victim. His voice hardened, and he said he was going to help me understand exactly how I had been used. He led me deeper into the vault, past the Caravaggio, past a Vermeer I also recognized, past 3 more paintings I knew from my time working with Marcus. Each one was a revelation. Each one proof that I had been completely blind to my own expertise because I had trusted the wrong person. The pattern became clear to me slowly, then all at once. Marcus wasn't stealing fake paintings and selling them as real. He was stealing real masterpieces, having me clean them, and then swapping them out for the forgeries. Daniel stopped in front of a Raphael sketch that made my knees genuinely weak. He said yes. The collectors Marcus sold to himself included had been receiving museum-quality forgeries, while the real pieces went to a buyer abroad who didn't care about legal ownership. I asked how much. Though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer, he said conservatively, $200 million over 3 years. The number was so absurd, it didn't feel real. I had been working 60-hour weeks in a cramped studio, living on ramen noodles and deferred loan payments, while Marcus used my hands to steal a fortune. He said there was more. He pulled out his phone, swiped through images, and handed it to me. The photo had been taken 2 weeks before my wedding. It showed my apartment building, the walk-up in Queens I could barely afford. A woman was letting Marcus into the service entrance. A woman with my sister's face. The phone slipped from my numb fingers. Daniel caught me too, his arms coming around me as my legs gave out. I found myself pressed against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart through the thin fabric of his shirt. He told me to breathe. He commanded it. Just breathe. I pulled in air that tasted like cedar and danger. He said my sister had been Marcus's partner for at least a year. His voice was gentle, which somehow made it so much worse. She had helped Marcus plant evidence in my apartment, forged emails in my name, created a paper trail that made me look like the mastermind. The betrayal tore through me with claws. Not Marcus. I had already mourned him, mourned the illusion of him. But my sister, my only family, the person who was supposed to stand beside me, I broke. The tears came violent and ugly. The kind of crying that has no dignity, only raw pain. And Daniel held me through all of it. One hand cradling the back of my head, the other pressed flat against my back, anchoring me to his solid warmth while I fell apart. He didn't offer empty reassurances. He didn't tell me it would be okay. He simply held me in an underground vault surrounded by stolen masterpieces while I wept for the family I had lost and the innocence I would never get back. When the tears finally stopped, leaving me hollow and exhausted, I became aware of our position, pressed against him from chest to hip. My face buried in his neck, my hands fisted in his shirt, his hands on me a possessive, protective, dangerous. And beneath the grief, something else stirring, something dark and hungry that responded to his closeness like a match to dry kindling. I pulled back. His arms loosened but didn't fully release me. His hands slid to my waist, as if reluctant to let go completely. I asked why he had given me access to the vault, why he had let me see all of it. He said because he needed me to understand what I was capable of. His thumbs drew small circles against my hip bones, a touch that felt casual but burned through the thin fabric of my dress. He said Marcus had weaponized my genius. He wanted to empower it. I asked toward what end. He said one word. Revenge. Simple. Absolute. He said I was going to help him find every piece Marcus had stolen. Help him expose Marcus for exactly what he was. And when it was done, Marcus would have nothing left but the memory of what he threw away. It should have sounded dramatic. Instead, it sounded like justice. I asked what happened to me then, when the debt was settled and Marcus was destroyed. Daniel's hands tightened at my waist, pulling me fractionally closer. He said then I decided who I wanted to be. The victim Marcus had tried to create, or the woman Daniel saw when he looked at me. I asked who that was. His smile was dark and full of promises that terrified me and thrilled me in equal measure. He said a queen who didn't know her own power yet. He released me then, stepped back, and the absence of his warmth felt like cold water. He moved to a console near the vault entrance and came back with a thick leather portfolio. He said it was the federal file on me. Everything the authorities thought they knew. Every piece of evidence Marcus and my sister had planted. He told me to study it, find the flaws. Tomorrow we would start building my defense. I took the portfolio. Its weight somehow heavier than all the paintings surrounding us. He stopped me as I turned toward the stairs. He said my sister had sent Marcus a message the morning of my wedding. I waited, knowing I didn't want to hear this, but unable to walk away. She had told him she was pregnant. His dark eyes held mine without flinching. She had asked him when he was going to tell me that he had chosen her. The final knife slipped between my ribs with surgical precision. Marcus hadn't just used me. He had replaced me. And my sister had participated in my humiliation with a calculated cruelty, that took my breath away completely. I left Daniel in the vault and climbed the stairs. But when I reached my suite, I didn't go inside. Instead, I found myself walking through dark halls toward the wing Miriam had told me was Daniel's private domain. I shouldn't have. It was madness. It was dangerous. It was crossing a line that couldn't be uncrossed. But grief and rage and something darker drove me forward until I was standing outside his door. I knocked before I could think better of it. The door opened almost immediately. Daniel stood in the threshold, still in his training clothes, and he showed no surprise at finding me there. Like he had been expecting it, I whispered, "Don't let me be alone tonight," hating myself for the need, for the weakness, for the way my body leaned toward his like a flower turning toward sun. He stepped aside without a single word, letting me into his space. His suite was spare, dark wood, clean lines, almost military in its simplicity. But there were touches of warmth, books in 2 languages, art on the walls, not valuable pieces, but things he must have chosen because they moved him personally. A photograph of a young woman who had his same cheekbones, his same sharp jaw. He said she was his sister. She had died when he was 17. The admission hung between us, a piece of vulnerability offered in exchange for my own. He poured us both drinks. We sat at opposite ends of a low couch, the space between us charged with everything unspoken. Outside, dawn was beginning to break, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold. I asked him to tell me about her, because I needed to think about something other than my own shattered family. So he did. He told me about a girl named Yuna, brilliant and fierce, who dreamed of becoming a painter. He told me about the accident that wasn't really an accident, about the debt his family had owed, about the choice he had made at 17 to take his father's place in something that dealt in violence and power. He said she would have been a better artist than any collector, but she gave him his love of it, taught him to see beauty in broken things. I asked if that was what I was, a broken thing he was collecting. Daniel turned to face me fully, and the intensity in his gaze stole every remaining breath from my body. He said I wasn't broken. He said I was a masterpiece someone had tried to paint over. He was just helping me remember what was underneath. He reached out slowly, giving me all the time in the world to pull away, and he tucked a curl behind my ear. His fingers lingered at my jaw. His thumb brushed the corner of my mouth, and I felt that touch everywhere. He murmured sleep, withdrew his hand even as my body swayed toward him. He said I was safe there. I curled into the corner of his couch, exhausted beyond anything I had words for, and let myself drift. The last thing I felt was Daniel draping a blanket over me, his hand resting briefly on the top of my head, in something that felt almost like a blessing. When I woke, sunlight was streaming through his windows and Daniel was gone. But there was a note on the coffee table in clean, precise handwriting. "The truth is a weapon. Learn to wield it." 2 weeks melted into 3. The estate became less of a prison and more of a fortress where I was learning to be someone new. Someone harder. Someone who understood that survival sometimes looked like sitting across from a crime boss at dinner and debating the attribution of a contested Titian with the passion of a scholar and the precision of someone who had finally stopped being afraid. Daniel was teaching me, though not in ways I had expected. He showed me his operation, not the violence, the infrastructure, the legitimate art acquisition firm that masked his other dealings. The network of forgers, authenticators, and collectors who existed in the gray spaces between legal and everything else. He was giving me the knowledge Marcus had deliberately kept from me, arming me with the understanding of the world I had been moving through completely blind. And with every lesson, every conversation, every moment spent in the same room, the tension between us grew. It was there in the way his hand would brush mine when passing documents, in the way his gaze would linger on the curve of my neck when he thought I wasn't looking, in the charged silence that fell when we were alone in his study late at night, supposedly working, but hyper-aware of every breath, every movement, every particle of space between us. I told myself it was just proximity, just the intensity of the situation, just my body's confused response to danger and protection living in the same person. I was lying. The truth revealed itself on a Thursday night when I couldn't sleep. I had been dreaming of Marcus, of my sister, of standing in that church while everyone watched me crumble. I woke up gasping, tangled in silk sheets, and knew immediately that I couldn't be alone. I found myself in Daniel's study, where a lamp still burned despite how late it was. He sat behind his desk, reading glasses on, surrounded by financial documents. The ordinariness of it hit me. This dangerous man doing mundane paperwork, looking almost vulnerable in the lamplight. He looked up when I entered. Something shifted in his expression, concern, and underneath that hunger barely held back. He asked if I couldn't sleep, his voice rough, like he had been reading for hours. I said bad dreams. I moved to the shelves lining his walls, running my fingers across book spines without really seeing them. I said I kept thinking about that day, about how stupid I had been. He said I wasn't stupid. I heard the scrape of his chair. Footsteps behind me. He said I was trusting. He said there was a difference. I turned to face him and found him closer than I expected. Close enough to see the faint shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. I asked if there was a difference. Then I asked what he called this, standing alone with him in the middle of the night, living in his home for weeks, letting him feed me, shelter me, touch me. His hand rose, hovering near my face without quite making contact. He asked if that was trust or stupidity. I said I didn't know. I admitted I didn't know anything anymore. He said yes, I did. His thumb brushed the corner of my mouth, and I felt it like lightning through my entire nervous system. He said I knew he wouldn't hurt me. I knew he saw me in ways Marcus never had. And I knew when I looked at him like that, it took every ounce of self-control he had not to. He stopped himself. His jaw clenched. His hand fell away. I asked not to what. The question escaped before I could stop it. Reckless, wanting. He said not to show me exactly how thoroughly I had undone him. His eyes blazed. Not to make me forget every touch that had come before his. Not to prove that I was always meant to be exactly where I was in his home, under his protection, close enough to ruin them both. The confession hung between us, raw, dangerous. I should have stepped back, should have retreated to my safe, separate wing, should have maintained whatever distance was keeping this from becoming catastrophically complicated. Instead, I stepped closer. He said abruptly that he needed to show me something. He moved away with visible effort. Went to his desk, unlocked a drawer, pulled out a thick file folder. He handed it to me. I opened it. Scanned the first document, and my breath stopped. It was a financial statement from an arts education foundation. The scholarship, the one that had saved me from dropping out of school, that had paid for my graduate studies, that had made my entire career possible. Except the foundation didn't exist. I flipped through the pages, my hands shaking. Transfers from a shell company in the Cayman Islands, tuition payments made directly to the university, monthly payments that had continued long after I thought the grant had run out, money Marcus must have been pocketing while I drowned in student debt that was nothing but a lie to cover his theft. And at the bottom, a signature I now recognized, Daniel Voss. I said his name like a question and an accusation all at once. He confirmed it. He said he had been funding me for 10 years, since I was 22, and submitted my undergraduate thesis on Caravaggio's use of shadow. He said it was brilliant, fearless. He said he knew then what I could become. I said he had been watching me for 10 years. Anger and something else, something that felt dangerously like gratitude, warred in my chest. He said he had been investing in me. He moved closer, and this time I didn't step back. He said he had been waiting for me to reach my full potential. And then Marcus had walked into my conservation studio, seen that same potential, and used it instead of nurturing it. I demanded to know why. Why invest in a stranger, wait years, watch from the shadows? Daniel's hand rose to my face, cupped my jaw, tilted my head back to meet his gaze. He said because the first time he saw my work, it felt like recognition, like finding something he had been missing without knowing it was gone. He said he had built everything he had on understanding value, and that I was the most valuable thing he had ever encountered. I said I wasn't a thing, my voice weak even as I said it. He said no, his thumb traced my lower lip with aching slowness. He said I was a force, a revelation. A masterpiece Marcus had tried to forge into something less, but he saw me. He said he had always seen me. The folders slipped from my hands, papers scattered across the rug. Neither of us moved to pick them up. I whispered that he wasn't my guardian angel. I said he was the devil offering me everything I didn't know I wanted. He said yes. His hands found my waist and pulled me against him. The contact was electric. "But I'm your devil," he said. His forehead dropped to mine, his breath mixing with my own. He said he had been mine since the moment he read my name on that thesis. And I had been his since the moment I put my hand in his at that altar. I said it was insane, even as my hands found his chest and felt his heart hammering under my palms. He said tell him to leave, tell him I needed space, tell him anything except what he could see in my eyes right then. I asked what he saw. His voice came out rough, want. He said fear, anger, and underneath all of it, the same thing he had been fighting since the moment I walked into his study that first night. I asked what that was. He said desire. His hands tightened on me, drawing me closer, raw, undeniable. Mutual. He was right. God help me. He was completely right. Somewhere between the church and the vault, between his confessions and his patience, between anger and gratitude, I had stopped seeing him as just my captor or my savior. I had started seeing him as a man, a devastatingly complicated, dangerously compelling man who looked at me like I was the most precious thing in his fortress full of precious things. I told him I didn't know how to do this, my voice breaking. I said I didn't know how to want him when I should still hate him. Didn't know how to trust any of it when everything else had been a lie. He said don't trust it. He murmured the words with his lips so close to mine I could feel every one of them. Trust me instead. Trust that he had waited 10 years. Trust that he wouldn't rush me. Trust that when I finally came to him, and he said I would, he said it as a fact. It would be because I chose it, not because he demanded it. The promise in his voice made me shiver. He was offering patience, control. The one thing Marcus had stolen from me, agency over my own choices, my own desire. I echoed my question from weeks before. What if I was never ready? He smiled against my lips, not quite kissing me, close enough to be maddening. He said then he would spend the rest of his life in this exquisite torture, wanting me and waiting. Because having me near but untouched was still better than the decade he had spent watching me. From the shadows, he pulled back then, released me even though I could see the cost of it in the tension of his shoulders, the clench of his jaw, the way his hands curled into fists at his sides. He told me to go to bed, his voice strained. Before he forgot, he was trying to be honorable. I left, not because I was afraid of him, because I was terrified of myself, of the part of me that wanted to close that distance and find out what happened if I finally stopped running. But as I lay alone staring at the ceiling, I knew the truth. Daniel wasn't my captor. He wasn't even really my savior. He was something far more dangerous. He was the one person who had ever seen me completely and wanted me anyway, who had invested in me before I could prove my worth, who had waited years for me to become who I was meant to be. And that was the most seductive thing of all. Morning brought clarity of a different kind. I woke to a note slipped under my door. Daniel's handwriting directing me to the conservatory. The mansion's glass and steel extension had been transformed overnight into something that stole my breath completely. A restoration lab, professional, grade, conservation tables positioned for perfect natural light, microscopes and equipment that belonged in museum settings. Pigment libraries organized with obsessive precision. Climate controls calibrated to archival standards. Everything I had ever needed in my cramped studio, multiplied 10 times over. Daniel's voice came from the doorway. He said to use the rage. I turned to find him leaning against the door frame in a charcoal suit. He said to paint with it, restore with it, let it make me sharper. I asked what he wanted me to do with it. He moved to a painting covered with protective cloth in the corner. He said it was the last piece I had restored for Marcus, the one I finished 2 days before the wedding. My hands trembled as I pulled back the cloth. The painting was small, barely 2 feet square, a still life attributed to a minor Dutch master. Flowers in a glass vase, technically polished but unremarkable. I had spent 6 weeks on it, carefully removing the yellowed varnish and overpaint, stabilizing the canvas, retouching minor damage. Standard work, nothing extraordinary. I asked what I was looking for. Daniel moved to stand beside me. He said Marcus had been obsessed with this piece, called me 17 times during the restoration, visited my studio 9 times more than with any other piece, and 2 days after I finished it, instead of delivering it to the buyer, he put it in secure storage. Obsession. Marcus had never been obsessive about the art itself, only about what it could earn him. So why this piece? I positioned it under the microscope and examined the surface at high magnification. The varnish removal had been perfect. I could see that even now. The original pigments were vibrant, the brushwork confident. But there in the lower right corner, something caught my eye. A pattern in the brush strokes that seemed almost deliberate. I asked Daniel to bring me the UV lamp. I was already too focused to register how quickly he complied. Under ultraviolet light, certain pigments glow in distinctive ways. It's a standard authentication technique. But this, the pattern blazed under UV, not the natural movement of an artist's hand. Something written deliberately in pigment that glowed brilliant green under the black light. I breathed, oh my God. My hands flew to the keyboard, pulling up references. This isn't a restoration technique. This is mine. Daniel's voice sharpened. He told me to explain. In graduate school, I had developed a method for invisible watermarking. The memory came rushing back, my thesis. The breakthrough that had almost gotten me expelled for being too unconventional. Using specific pigments that glow under UV in patterns that can be read as binary code, it was theoretical, a way to prove authentication without damaging the work. I had never actually put it into practice because the art world thought it was too invasive. He asked if I had used it here. It wasn't really a question. I said no, and then I stopped, the memory flooding back like water through a broken dam. Marcus had asked me about it during our 2nd month together. He said it was brilliant. He said I should publish it. I told him the formula, showed him my notes. He had given me underpainting texture maps to follow for structural integrity. I thought I was applying a stabilizing grid. I was painting data. I said I was painting data. He told me to show him the pattern. His phone already in his hand. I photographed the UV-illuminated section, my hands shaking with rage and realization. He forwarded it. 3 minutes later, his phone rang. The conversation was fast and intense. When he ended it, his eyes blazed with something between fury and triumph. He said it was a cryptocurrency wall, at passkey, a 64-character hexadecimal string encrypted in my brushstroke pattern. His team estimated Marcus had been using this method to store access codes for offshore accounts. The implications crashed over me in a wave. Every painting I had restored over the past 3 years could potentially contain keys to Marcus's stolen fortune. He had turned my technique, my intellectual property, my innovation into his personal encryption system. I asked how much, even though I was afraid of the answer. He said the wallet this particular key unlocked held $23 million. The number didn't feel real. None of it felt real. I had been living in poverty, worrying about student loans, eating cheap meals, while my ex-fiancé used my genius to hide a fortune that could have bought a small nation. He said there was something else. His right-hand man, a lean and dangerous man named Leo, entered the conservatory carrying a tablet. He said they had found it in Marcus's corporate files. I needed to see it. The document was an insurance policy. Key person life insurance, the kind companies took out on essential employees. It wasn't about the money, Marcus. The payout was designed to look like a robbery gone wrong. He wanted me erased so I couldn't testify. The insured person was me. I read the clauses, my vision narrowing down to a single point. The policy paid out in specific circumstances. Suicide, accidental death in custody, death from violent assault. All situations that could plausibly happen to someone facing federal charges for art fraud. He was going to have me killed. The words came out flat and emotionless because the alternative was screaming. He wasn't just going to let me take the fall. He was going to make sure I didn't survive long enough to defend myself. Daniel's hand found the small of my back, a grounding touch that kept me from shattering. Leo said the policy had been filed 3 weeks before the wedding, and that Marcus had already hired someone. I turned to face Daniel, who, my voice shaking with fury breaking through the shock. Leo said a contractor who specialized in making prison deaths look like suicides. His voice was clinical. They had intercepted the payment. The hit had been scheduled for my 3rd day in federal custody. 3 days. 72 hours. That was all I had between that church and Marcus's plan turning lethal. And Daniel had gotten me out without me even knowing I needed to be gotten out. I demanded to know how he had known, how he had found all of this. He said because he had been watching me for a decade. He turned me to face him fully. His hands framed my face with devastating gentleness. He said he knew every financial move Marcus had made, every shell company, every document filed, because the moment Marcus took out that policy, Daniel knew exactly what was being planned. I said he had known Marcus was going to kill me, and he waited until the wedding. He said he had needed the marriage to be real, binding, unbreakable. He had needed to create a situation where I was legally under his protection, before the authorities could take me into custody. He had cut it close, too close, but I was there, I was safe, and the hired killer was no longer a problem. I should have been horrified by the casual finality in that last statement. Instead, I felt a savage satisfaction that terrified me with its own intensity. I asked what came next, forcing myself to focus on the practical instead of the way his hands on my face were making my entire nervous system short-circuit. He said we had proof of the encryption method, proof of the insurance policy. He said we were going to use it to draw Marcus out. He said there was a private auction happening soon, major collectors, underground market, no questions asked. The painting that contained Marcus's largest wallet key was being sold legitimately through Daniel's acquisition firm. He said I would authenticate it, live on stage in front of witnesses, including several people who worked for Marcus's overseas buyer. Marcus would be there, Daniel said. He won't be able to stay away. The moment I authenticated that painting and described my watermarking technique, Marcus would know the code had been cracked. He would have to move his money immediately, and Daniel's team would be waiting to trace every single transaction. It was elegant, brutal, exactly the kind of plan that appealed to the part of me that wanted to watch Marcus burn completely to the ground. I asked when we left. 3 days, he said. He held my shoulders and said it would be dangerous. Marcus was desperate. Desperate men made reckless choices. Good, I said, meeting his dark gaze with steel I hadn't known I had 3 months ago. Let him be reckless. Let him make mistakes, because I was done being his victim. Daniel studied me for a long moment. I saw approval in his expression, and underneath that, something darker, something possessive and hungry that made my breath catch. He said there was one more thing. When we went to the auction, we would be presenting as a married couple. Unified front. Marcus needed to believe we were unshakable. I said I could do that, more confidently than I actually felt. He asked if I really could. His hand rose to my jaw, tilting my face up. He asked if I could stand beside him in front of hundreds of people and make them believe I had chosen this. Chosen him? The question held layers of meaning. Was he asking about the mission or something else entirely? I said slowly that I had chosen this, surprising myself with how true it felt. Not at first, not in that church when I had 3 seconds to decide, but every day since. Every moment I could have run or reached out for help or betrayed him. I chose to stay. I chose to trust him. I stopped, the words too enormous for that moment. He said to say it. Finish the thought. I said I chose you, my voice barely above a whisper. I don't know when it happened. I don't know if it's something psychological or just pure madness. But somewhere between the vault and the study, between his confessions and his patience, I stopped pretending this was just about surviving. I chose you, Daniel. God help me. His control shattered. One moment we were standing apart. The next, his mouth was on mine. Claiming, consuming, turning every cell in my body to liquid fire. His hands tangled in my curls, angling my head for deeper access. And I opened for him with a sound that would have embarrassed me, if I wasn't too far gone to care even slightly. The kiss was everything I had been denying myself, desperate, angry, laced with weeks of tension and wanting. His tongue swept against mine, and I tasted dark promises. Patience finally unleashed. My hands found his hair, his neck, his shoulders. Needing to touch and confirm he was real, that this was real, he lifted me onto the conservation table, stepped between my legs, and the closeness was so complete, so claiming, that I gasped against his mouth. He swallowed the sound, one hand sliding to the small of my back, while the other cradled my head with devastating tenderness that contrasted beautifully with the hunger of his kiss. He said my name like a prayer and a curse. He pulled back just enough to meet my eyes, pupils blown wide. Breathing wrecked, he said if we didn't stop now. I said don't stop. Don't you dare stop. His laugh was dark and full of promise. He said not here, not like this. He said when he finally had me, and he said it as a certainty, it would not be on a conservation table in broad daylight where anyone could walk through the door. I asked where then. He said his bed. His mouth found the pulse point at my throat, and I felt his smile against my skin. Where he could take his time, where he could give me every bit of the attention he had imagined for 10 years. Where the only sound would be my own pleasure, and the only name on my lips would be his. I shuddered. Desire and anticipation, and something still close to fear all braided together. I said I hadn't, not since Marcus. He said he knew. He lifted his head and met my eyes with fierce certainty. He said when I was ready, he would burn every memory of Marcus's touch away until I couldn't recall any hands but his. The promise in his voice made me tremble. He stepped back, released me with visible effort, and I immediately mourned the warmth of him. He said after the auction, his voice rough, he said ask him again after we came back. I asked what I would be asking. His smile was pure, unholy, devastating sin. He said to ask him to show me exactly what it meant to be his. He left me there, trembling and wanting, surrounded by art and possibility, and I knew with perfect clarity that everything was about to change. The auction was calling, vengeance was coming, and afterward, in the ruins of my old life, I would choose to step into the new one, not as collateral, not as a victim, but as the woman Daniel Voss had always seen when he looked at me. The private jet cut through the darkness like a blade through silk. The city glittered below us like scattered diamonds on black velvet. I pressed my forehead against the cool window, watching it materialize, a sprawling creature of light and shadow that felt both foreign and strangely familiar. He said I was thinking too loud again. His voice came from across the cabin, low and intimate despite the space between us. He sat in shadow, only the amber glow of his glass catching any light. I said I was thinking at an appropriate volume for someone about to publicly authenticate stolen art in front of international criminals. I didn't turn from the window. My reflection ghosted over the cityscape below. A woman in travel clothes who looked nothing like the terrified bride from 3 months earlier. He said I was thinking about the kiss. My breath fogged the glass. He was right. I had been replaying that moment in the conservatory on a loop that never stopped. The taste of him, the way his control had shattered, the dark promise in his voice when he told me to ask him again after the auction. I murmured arrogant. His smile was a slash of white in the darkness. He said accurate. The jet began its descent. And with it, the last of my hesitation fell away. This wasn't about fear anymore. This was about power. Mine, finally mine to use. The hotel suite overlooked the river, all floor, to ceiling windows and minimalist luxury that whispered of serious old money. Daniel's team had transformed the sitting room into a command center, laptops, surveillance feeds, the organized chaos of a military operation wearing the costume of a business trip. Leo briefed us while I unpacked. The auction was by invitation only. 300 guests, mostly legitimate collectors, with a dozen black market buyers scattered through the mix. Marcus's representative would be there, a man named Chang, an art dealer who had been moving pieces through shell companies. Daniel asked about security. His jacket came off, revealing the holster beneath, a reminder that none of this was pretend. Leo said it was heavy but manageable. The venue was neutral ground, a powerful family's territory with safe passage guaranteed for all attendees. His expression made clear he trusted that guarantee approximately as much as I trusted any of Marcus's promises. Daniel said then they would bring their own insurance. His gaze found mine across the room. I would authenticate on stage. The moment I confirmed the piece and mentioned my watermarking technique, Chang would report back to Marcus. Marcus would panic and try to move the money. They would be waiting. I asked what happened if Marcus didn't take the bait. I was unpacking the black dress Daniel had selected for me, armor dressed up as fashion. He said Marcus would take it. His ego wouldn't let him walk away from the money. His fear wouldn't let him trust that we didn't know more than we were showing. He dismissed his team with a gesture and waited until we were alone before continuing. He said this was the moment we ended it properly. He moved to the window with his glass, silhouetted against the city's electric night. For just a moment, the mask slipped. Not fear, something closer to the feeling of standing at the edge of something vast and not knowing how to survive the fall. I said he should rest, then found myself crossing to stand beside him. The city sprawled below us, endless and unknowable. He said he wouldn't be resting. He'd be watching the surveillance feeds, running scenarios, preparing for every variable. I said control freak. He said was there another way to keep me alive? The question carried more weight than its words. An admission of something he hadn't quite managed to say out loud yet. I turned to face him, close enough to smell the cedar of his cologne, mixing with the whiskey. I asked if that was really what this was about, keeping me alive. His hand rose, not quite touching my face. Hovering there, a question written in the space between us. He said it was about keeping me. Everything else was just the method. The confession hung in the air, raw and unadorned. I should have stepped back, should have maintained the distance that kept this professional, strategic. Instead, I leaned into his almost touch, my cheek finding his palm. I whispered after the auction, echoing his earlier promise back at him. His fingers curled against my skin, a tremor of restraint barely held together. He told me to go to bed. Before he forgot, they had a war to win the next day. I went, but I felt his gaze tracking my retreat all the way out of the room. Heavy as something physical, the gallery that night was a temple built for wealth and shadow. Crystal chandeliers threw fractured light across marble floors, illuminating faces I recognized from crime watch lists and financial magazines in equal measure. I stood in the preparation room, staring at my reflection in a full-length mirror, and barely recognized the woman looking back at me. The dress was black silk that moved like water, cut to suggest rather than reveal, with a neckline that framed the hollow of my throat where my pulse was fluttering visibly. My curls were swept up into an elaborate arrangement that exposed the length of my neck. Diamond earrings borrowed from Daniel's collection caught the light like stars. Miriam said softly that I looked like vengeance, beautiful and terrible. I turned from the mirror and reached for the small clutch holding my notes and microscope images. I said good. That was exactly the goal. Daniel entered without knocking. The air pressure in the room shifted. He wore a tuxedo that transformed him from dangerous to devastating, every line cut to emphasize the predatory elegance of his frame. But it was his eyes that made my breath disappear, dark, consuming, tracking every detail of my appearance with an intensity that felt like being permanently marked. He asked if I was ready, his voice rougher than usual. I knew he was seeing not just the dress, but what it represented, my choice to stand beside him. To weaponize my own appearance the way he weaponized everything, I said ready, and I accepted the arm he offered. The gallery hummed with controlled energy, the barely leashed hunger that comes with standing near rare beauty and rarer opportunity. Daniel guided me through the crowd with his hand at the small of my back, a mark of possession that turned heads and sparked whispers in our wake. I spotted Chang near the bar, mid-40s, expensively dressed, with the careful neutrality of a man whose entire living was made in gray spaces. His eyes tracked us across the room, calculating, measuring threat. I murmured against Daniel's shoulder, the gesture appearing intimate to anyone watching, that Chang had seen us. Daniel said good, let him report back, let Marcus know exactly what he was facing. Daniel's hand spread wider at my back, fingers pressing through silk to skin. He said I wasn't Marcus's victim anymore. I was his queen. The possessive pride in his voice sent heat pooling low in my stomach. Dangerous, intoxicating, the auction opened with lesser pieces testing the room's appetite, building hunger, building tension. I waited backstage with the painting that was going to change everything, my heart beating in a steady rhythm of anticipation rather than fear. Through a gap in the curtains, I could see the crowd, could see Chang's position near the exit, could see Daniel's people stationed at carefully chosen points throughout the space. The auction director appeared at my elbow, nervous. He said I was on in 2 minutes. He said to keep the authentication brief but thorough. These buyers were sophisticated. They'd know immediately if I was being vague. I said I knew exactly what they needed to hear. And I surprised myself with how steady my own voice was. The stage lights were blinding, turning the audience into a sea of silhouettes, punctuated by the gleam of jewelry and the red dots of recording devices. I positioned the painting on the easel, adjusted the lighting to showcase the brushwork, and felt the entire room lean forward with collective hunger. I said good evening. My voice carried through the space, amplified and strangely, newly powerful. I introduced myself as Dr. Elena Leonard and explained I had been asked to authenticate a piece attributed to a Dutch Golden Age master. I began with the technical details, pigment analysis, canvas composition, the telltale signs of 17th century craftsmanship. The audience was rapt, but I wasn't speaking to them. I was speaking to one man watching through Chang's phone, thousands of miles away. However, I continued, letting a small smile curve my lips. What made this piece truly unique was a revolutionary authentication method I had developed during my graduate research. I gestured to the microscope images projected behind me, using specific fluorescent pigments visible only under ultraviolet light. I had created a watermarking system that allowed restorers to sign their work invisibly. The room erupted in murmurs. Chang's hand went to his phone. This particular piece, I continued, carried my signature technique, a pattern that could be read as a 64-character hexadecimal string. I met Chang's eyes across the darkened gallery. Some people, I said, might call it a key. I called it insurance that my work could never be falsely attributed. Chang was already moving toward the exit, phone pressed to his ear. Daniel's people didn't stop him. This was precisely what we had been waiting for. I finished the authentication, confirmed the piece's credentials, and stepped down from the stage to thunderous applause. But I was tracking Chang's retreat the whole time, watching the first domino fall. Daniel materialized at my side. His hand found mine with an ease that felt like it had always been this way. He murmured brilliant against my ear. The praise sent a shiver down my spine. He said Marcus had taken the bait. I asked what came next. Even as Leo appeared with a tablet showing financial transactions, lighting up like a whole city's worth of fireworks. Marcus's accounts draining in real time as he desperately tried to move his money before what he believed was our imminent discovery of everything. Daniel said now they hunted. His smile was predatory in the most beautiful way. Chang was heading to a private room in the back. He thought he was alerting his employer. Instead, he was leading them exactly where they needed to go. We moved through the gallery with the casual ease of guests simply enjoying the evening, but I could feel the coiled tension in Daniel's body. The predator under the tuxedo. His security team formed a loose, invisible perimeter around us, obvious only to those trained to see it. The private rooms were designed for discreet negotiations, soundproofed, unmarked, accessible only to VIP buyers. Leo had already handled the locks, making them look like a malfunction. We could hear Chang's voice through the door. Rapid and urgent, English phrases breaking through. She knows about the cipher. The accounts are compromised. Need extraction. Daniel's hand settled at my waist, pulling me close as we listened. His mouth found my ear. He said when we went in, "Stay behind him." Chang was desperate. Desperate people were dangerous people. I said I wasn't afraid, surprised to find it completely true. He said he knew. He said that was what terrified him. His lips brushed my temple, too brief to be a kiss, intimate enough to spike my pulse regardless. The door came open. Daniel's presence filled the space with lethal authority. Chang spun. His phone hit the marble floor. His hand moved towards something at his hip. Leo appeared behind him, something small and hard-pressed into Chang's spine. He said, "Mr. Voss would like a word." Chang's face cycled through confusion, then recognition, then fear, then fast calculation. He said Daniel couldn't do this here. The family had guaranteed safe passage for legitimate business. Daniel said this wasn't legitimate business. His voice conversational, even as every line of his body said otherwise. Conspiring to defraud a featured guest of the evening didn't fall under any safe passage protection. Chang said he didn't know what they were talking about, his denial automatic, flawless. I stepped out from behind Daniel, letting Chang see me fully, the woman whose technique he had just watched explained on stage, whose genius had been weaponized without her knowledge or consent. I said, "We knew about Marcus. We knew about the overseas accounts. We knew about everything." Chang's face went pale. Daniel's hand found my back again. That possessive touch I was beginning to need like something essential. He said I wasn't the fool they had assumed. He said I was the architect of their entire operation, and I was about to dismantle it piece by piece. Chang said Marcus would disappear, that he had already activated his failsafes. Leo held up the tablet, showing accounts sitting at 0. He said no, he hadn't, because they had been draining his wallets for the last 15 minutes. Every transaction Marcus was attempting was being rerouted through shell companies that terminated in frozen assets. By morning, Marcus would have nothing left but the clothes on his back and the enemies he had made. The fight went out of Chang like air from a balloon with a slow leak. He asked what they wanted. Daniel said his location, his voice dropping into something that had no warmth in it whatsoever. Where he was hiding, who he was with, every contingency plan he had shared. Chang asked what happened if he told them all of it, his eyes moving between us, calculating the odds one last time. Daniel said then Chang got to keep the gallery job, the nice apartment, and the offshore account they knew he had been skimming from Marcus's operations. He said refuse, and Chang could explain to the family hosting tonight's event why their neutrality had been compromised by his presence. It wasn't really a choice, all three of us understood that. Chang talked. He talked for 20 solid minutes, spilling details about Marcus's network, his backup plans, his paranoid security measures. And with every word, I felt the net tightening around my ex-fiancé's throat. When we walked back out, the auction was still in full swing. None of the other guests had any idea that a small war had just been won in the back corridors. Daniel guided me toward the exit, his hand never leaving my back, his presence a barrier between me and the chaos of my own emotions. The car was waiting, black and anonymous in the night. We slid into the back, and the door closed with a solid sound that sealed us away from the world. Daniel said I had done it. He turned to face me in the dim interior. City lights played across his features, turning him into something almost mythic. Half shadow, half flame. He said I had destroyed Marcus without firing a single shot. I said we had done it. But the victory felt hollow. I said Marcus was still out there. He said not for long. His hand found mine in the darkness between us, fingers threading through mine with an intimacy that felt like it had always been there. He said Chang had confirmed. Marcus was in Jakarta. His team was already moving. I said I wanted to be there. The words surprised me. But I meant everyone. I said when he found Marcus, I wanted to watch him understand exactly what he had lost, what it was going to cost him. Daniel studied me in the flickering light, and something shifted in his expression. Approval mixed with something that looked almost like awe. He said it wouldn't be clean. What happened when they found Marcus? I said what happened would be exactly what Marcus deserved. I leaned closer. We were inches apart now, sharing breath, sharing heat. I reminded him what he had promised. He had said ask me again after the auction. He said the auction wasn't quite over, but his thumb was tracing patterns on my palm, making a liar out of his words. I said close enough, and I closed the distance, my mouth finding his with all the pent-up hunger of 3 months of waiting, wanting, and refusing to give in. This kiss was different from the one in the conservatory, less desperate, more certain, a claiming that went both ways equally. His hands came up to frame my face, tilting my head for deeper access, and I opened for him with a sound that would have embarrassed me if I had a single functioning thought left in my head. He tasted like whiskey and dark promises, like power and patience finally given permission. When we finally broke apart, both breathing in ragged pieces, his forehead rested against mine. He said my name like a prayer, like a warning, like both at the same time. I said no more warnings, my hands fisting in his shirt. I said no more waiting, no more maybe. I was choosing this. I was choosing him. His laugh was dark and full of relief. He said then they did this right. He pressed one more kiss to my lips. Tender and absolutely devastating, he said after Jakarta, after Marcus, after I had my vengeance, then they could start something that wasn't built entirely on survival. I felt the frustration acutely, but I understood what he was offering, not just a moment, partnership. He said promise him. I said it as a demand. I need you to promise me. He said I promise. His hand slid to my waist, drawing me across the seat until I was nearly against him. His breath hot against my ear. He said he promised that when he finally had me, it would be worth every second of waiting. He promised he would make me forget every touch that had come before his. He promised his teeth grazed my ear, and I shuddered that I would never doubt again whose I was. The car pulled up to the hotel, reality pushing back in from the edges. But as Daniel helped me out, his hand possessive and certain at the small of my back, I felt the weight of every promise settling around me like something I had been waiting my entire life to wear. Jakarta was waiting, vengeance was coming, and after there would be no more barriers between what we were and what we were finally allowed to become. The flight to Jakarta was longer than the last one, and I spent it in a state of anticipatory tension that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with the man across the cabin, who kept looking at me like I was a puzzle he was trying to solve and a prize he had already claimed. I said stop, without even looking up from the financial documents I was pretending to read. He asked stop what, his voice barely containing its amusement. I said stop looking at me like that. Like what? He asked. Like you're mentally cataloging every single way you're going to make good on those promises. Heat crept up my neck as I finally met his gaze. He was sprawled in his seat with the ease of someone who had never once questioned his right to take up space. Shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms. A smile at his lips that promised nothing good and everything wanted. He said he wasn't mentally cataloging. His smile widened. He said he was mentally prioritizing. The heat in my cheeks intensified. Daniel, I started, using his name as a warning. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Suddenly the entire space between us felt electric. He said say his name like that again. Half prayer, half warning. It made him want to show me exactly why the warning existed. I tried to say we were supposed to be focused on finding Marcus, but my voice had no conviction in it whatsoever. He said he could multitask. He stood, crossed to my seat with an intention that was entirely predatory. His hand found the armrest beside my head, caging me in without touching me. He said he could plan to dismantle my ex-fiancé while simultaneously imagining what I would sound like when I stopped saying his name as a warning and started saying it as something else entirely. My breath caught. This version of Daniel, the playful, hungry, the careful control he usually kept so precisely maintained, just gone, was devastating in a way I hadn't prepared for. I said he was supposed to be a terrifying crime boss. He said he was a terrifying crime boss. His free hand traced the line of my jaw, thumb brushing my lower lip. He said he was also just a man who had been waiting a decade for me to look at him the way I was looking at him right now. I asked how I was looking at him. He said like he might devour me. His smile turned wicked. He said he was very much in favor of whichever of us got there first. The pilot's voice came over the intercom announcing descent into Jakarta. Daniel pulled back with something that looked like genuine reluctance, but the promise in his eyes as he returned to his seat made clear this was a delay, not a cancellation. Jakarta hit like a wall of wet heat the moment we stepped off the plane. The private terminal gave some relief, but nothing could entirely cut through the heavy tropical air and the density of the city pressing in from all sides. Daniel's local contact, a woman named Sari with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, briefed us during the drive to the safe house. She said Marcus was holed up in a residential complex in a neighborhood full of expats, easy to blend in. Lots of Western faces. She navigated the city's chaotic traffic with the ease of long practice. She said he had been moving money through local exchanges, trying to cash out what he thought they hadn't frozen yet. I asked from the back seat, pressed up against Daniel's side in the cramped car, how long until Marcus realized it was all gone. She said he already knew. Her smile could have cut glass. His last transaction attempt had been declined 4 hours ago. Since then, he had been making increasingly desperate calls to anyone who might wire him money for a plane ticket, to his sister, his mother, old college friends, anyone. Sari pulled into an underground garage beneath an unremarkable building. She said he was trapped, broke, panicking. The safe house was purely functional, surveillance equipment, secure communications, enough weapons to stage a small coup. Leo was already there coordinating with local contacts. His expression grim. He said they had a problem without preamble. The authorities had picked Marcus up an hour ago. He said an international notice had come through. Local police grabbed him at a currency exchange. He pulled up footage on one of the monitors. Grainy security camera footage showing Marcus in handcuffs, looking smaller and more pathetic than I remembered. Leo said they were holding him at the embassy pending extradition. I said then they had lost him. The moment Marcus was in official custody, he had already made a deal. Leo interrupted. He said Marcus had named me and Daniel, claiming we had conspired to frame him, that we were the real masterminds behind the forgery ring. The rage was instant and consuming. I said he was doing it again, making himself the victim while turning me into the villain. Leo said not quite. He said this time Marcus was implicating both of us, which meant he was desperate enough to believe official protection could shield him from Daniel. Daniel asked if it would. Something cold and absolute settled over his features. He said not even a little. But it didn't matter. Marcus wouldn't make it to testimony. The promise in those words should have frightened me. Instead, I felt a savage satisfaction I didn't even try to question. Leo said there was more, reluctantly. He said my sister was with Marcus. She had been in Jakarta the entire time. The authorities were offering her immunity in exchange for corroborating Marcus's version of events. He showed me another image, my sister, visibly pregnant now, standing next to federal agents with the look of someone who had calculated the odds and made her choice. He said they thought they had enough to indict us both. I stared at the image of the sister I had once loved more than anything. now carrying the child of the man who tried to destroy me, and I felt something fundamental break cleanly inside me. Not heartbreak that required some remaining attachment. This was colder, cleaner, the final severing of a bond that had been fraying for longer than I had admitted to myself. I said I needed to see them. Daniel started to object, calling my name. I said I needed to see them. I met his eyes. I said I needed to look them both in the face and watch them lie to federal agents about me. I said I needed that closure. He studied me for a long moment, reading depths I wasn't certain I wanted exposed. Then he nodded. He said they would arrange a formal deposition. Me, Marcus, my sister, federal prosecutors. Everything recorded, everything official. Leo said they would destroy me. He said Marcus's lawyers were ruthless. I said good. Let them try. The embassy's conference room was designed to be intimidating. Polished wood. Official seals. Cameras recording from multiple angles. I sat across from Marcus for the first time since the church, and the reality of him was almost laughable compared to the monster I had been building in my mind for months. He had lost weight. His expensive clothes hung wrong on him now. There were shadows under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting dread. When his gaze met mine, I saw fear flicker across his face before he buried it under bravado. He tried for warmth. He said my name like we were old friends, said he was so glad I was safe. When he heard what Daniel had done, I cut him off. My voice arctic. I said we were not doing this. We were not pretending he was concerned for my well-being. The federal prosecutor, a severe woman named Claire, leaned forward. She said they had testimony from Marcus that I had been the primary forger in his operation, that I had deliberately created fake provenance documents and sold them to unsuspecting collectors. I said really. I pulled out my tablet, queuing up the files I had spent weeks preparing, because I had something better than testimony. I had proof for the next hour. I systematically dismantled every single narrative Marcus had built. I presented technical analysis of the paintings, showing how the restoration techniques used were far beyond Marcus's skill level or knowledge. I provided emails where Marcus had specifically requested I use certain cleaning methods without once explaining why. I showed financial records proving every major purchase of art supplies coincided with Marcus receiving a new piece to move. But the killing blow was the chemistry. The pigments used in the forgeries contained a synthetic binding medium that wasn't commercially available until well after the dates Marcus's operation claimed for their creation. Either the forger had traveled backward in time, or someone was lying about the timeline. Claire argued it could have been fabricated, but her conviction was already wavering visibly. I said by who? The same woman who supposedly couldn't tell a real Caravaggio from a follower's work. I leaned forward and let them see the steel that 3 months had forged in me. I said they couldn't have it both ways. Either I was a genius forger who somehow forgot basic chronology, or I was exactly what I claimed to be an art historian who had been weaponized by a con artist. Marcus's lawyer whispered urgently in his ear. I watched my ex-fiancé say's face cycle through desperation, anger, and finally calculation. He blurted it out. What about the life insurance policy? He said explain that. Explain why I had taken out a $10 million policy on myself with his company as the beneficiary. The room went very still. Claire's eyes sharpened with renewed interest. I said I hadn't. I said he had. Using a forged signature and stolen biometric data from the conservation studio where I worked, I pulled up another document. Here was the signature analysis comparing the insurance application to known samples of my actual handwriting. The pressure patterns were wrong, the letter formation inconsistent. And most damagingly, I zoomed in on the signature line. The date stamp showed it had been signed while I was giving a lecture at the university. A lecture with over 200 witnesses and security camera footage covering every angle. Marcus's face went gray. His lawyer stood immediately. He said they needed a recess. I said Marcus needed a new attorney, because this one had just committed perjury. Claire held up a hand. She said, "Please sit. We were not done." Daniel's voice came from the doorway. He had been observing from an adjacent room. He entered now with the casual authority of a man who occupied every space he entered, as though it already belonged to him. He said his wife had cooperated fully with the investigation. She had provided documentation that exonerated her and implicated Marcus in multiple serious crimes. Unless they were prepared to charge her with something specific right now, this deposition was finished. Claire tried to begin. Daniel corrected her. He said Dr. Voss. He said he had a doctorate in art history from a prestigious university. He would appreciate the proper title. He moved to stand behind my chair. His hand settled on my shoulder in a gesture that was possessive and protective in equal measure. He asked if they were done here. Claire looked between us, clearly frustrated, clearly without enough ammunition left to continue. She said for now, but she said not to leave Jakarta. I said I was quite enjoying the city, and I said it sweetly. We were almost to the door when my sister's voice stopped me. She said, "Gracie, wait." I turned slowly. She stood in the doorway of an adjacent room, one hand on her swollen belly, her face a careful study in rehearsed remorse. She said she was sorry, and she almost sounded like she meant it. She said she never meant for things to go this far. She said Marcus told her I wouldn't be hurt, just inconvenienced. I said inconvenienced. The word tasted like acid. I said she helped frame me for fraud. She had slept with my fiancé. She was carrying his child, and she was calling that an inconvenience. She said she loved him, as though that settled anything. She said I never really had. She said I loved my work more than any person. She said she wanted something that was hers, not the scraps that were left over after I was done. The psychology of it was almost fascinating in its selfishness. She had rewritten our entire history to justify her choices, turned my dedication to my career into neglect of her, transformed her conscious betrayal into an inevitable consequence of my failures. I said she was right and watched surprise flicker across her face. I said I didn't love him. I loved the idea of him. The partnership, the respect for my work, the future we were supposedly building together, but I had never loved him the way she apparently did. I stepped closer, close enough to see the fear in her eyes. I said so she could have him. She could have the broke, desperate, soon-to-be, incarcerated father of her child. She could have the man who had been willing to have me killed for insurance money. She could have all of it. She said my name. I said I was done, and I turned away from her as thoroughly as she had once turned away from my trust. I said to enjoy her prize. I hoped he was worth everything she had paid for him. Daniel's hand found the small of my back as we walked away. Guiding me through corridors that blurred with tears I absolutely refused to let fall. Not here, not in front of them. Not after just winning. The embassy's back exit led to a covered garage where Sari waited. We slid into the back seat, and only when the door closed and the outside world disappeared did I let the trembling finally start. Daniel said quietly that I had destroyed him. He said I had walked into that room and taken apart every lie he had ever built, one by one. He said I was magnificent. I asked through the rawness in my throat why I felt like this then. He said because I was human. His hand moved through my curls, the rhythm of it steadying. He said I could be strong enough to face my betrayers and still feel the wound when I was finally safe enough to acknowledge it. I said I hated that she was pregnant. I admitted it into his shirt. I said I hated that some part of me still cared, that she was about to spend her life tied to someone who would hurt her eventually too. He said that wasn't weakness. He said that was proof I was better than both of them. He tilted my face up, his thumbs brushing away tears I hadn't realized were actually falling. I asked what happened now, needing the tactical focus to override the emotional spiral. He said now the case against me collapsed. Marcus's deal was worthless without my sister's corroboration, and her immunity depended entirely on supporting a version of events that no longer held up. His smile was grim satisfaction. Without that, they were both exposed to the full weight of what they had done. "And us?" I asked. He said we went home. His hand cupped my face. We went back to New York and we started living instead of surviving. I reminded him about his promise. He had said after Jakarta. His eyes darkened with heat that made my breath disappear. He said he had, and he said he kept his promises. His thumb traced my lower lip. He said first, though, they ended this properly. They made sure Marcus understood exactly what he had lost and what it was going to cost him for the rest of his life. The car wound through Jakarta's streets toward the safe house, but I barely noticed anything outside. I was too focused on the man beside me, on the weight of what he had promised, on the future that was finally, impossibly, actually within reach. Jakarta wasn't quite over, but everything that came after it was getting closer with every single mile. We came back to New York on a red eye that felt more like a victory parade than a retreat. Nearly 12 weeks had passed since the wedding. Time measured not in days anymore, but in threats survived. The authorities had quietly backed away from me, not officially, but with the kind of careful withdrawal that said clearly they knew they had been played. Marcus remained in custody, his deal worthless, his future measured in decades rather than years. My sister had disappeared into witness protection, pregnant and bound to a sinking ship of her own choosing. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt unmoored, as though the rage that had been keeping me moving for 3 months had finally burned itself out and left me hollow underneath. He said I was thinking too loud again. From the seat beside me, the first-class cabin was ours alone, his security team maintaining a careful distance several rows back. I said I was thinking at an appropriate volume, but there was no heat in the words. He said I was wondering what came next. Now that the war was over, I was wondering if we had only ever been held together by shared enemies. The accuracy of it stole my breath. I said mind reader. His thumb drew patterns on my palm that made concentration impossible. He said he had spent 10 years learning to read me, my habits, my patterns, the way I retreated into technical language when something was making me feel too much. I started to protest. He raised an eyebrow. I heard myself. I said fine. Maybe I did that. He said the answer was no. His other hand came up to frame my face, turning me toward him. He said we weren't held together by Marcus. We were held together by recognition, the kind that happened once in a lifetime if you were lucky, the kind where you saw someone and knew instantly, irrevocably, that they were going to matter. I asked if he had felt that 10 years ago, needing to understand. He said he had felt it the first time he saw my work, and when he actually saw me in person at a gallery opening 3 years before Marcus came along, he said he had known immediately that he was in trouble. His smile was rueful. He said he had also known I would never look past what he was to who he could actually be for me. So he had waited, he had invested, he had hoped that someday the circumstances would align. I said that was completely insane. He leaned closer, his forehead touching mine. He said so was marrying a stranger to save her from federal prison. So was letting her live in his home for 3 months without touching her. So was falling in love with a woman who had been watching him like he might devour her, and being desperately, helplessly hopeful that she would win that particular race. The confession hung between us, raw, terrifying, perfect. I said his name, and it came out broken in exactly the way I had stopped trying to prevent. He said to say it. He said tell him he wasn't alone in this. Tell him the past 3 months hadn't been just survival strategy for me either. I said you're not alone. The admission felt like stepping off a cliff into open sky. I said you're not alone. And I'm terrified, and I don't know how to do this when everything in my life has been constructed from lies. But I want to try. I stopped. The word still too enormous. He said to say it. I said I want you. Barely audible above my own heartbeat. I said I want whatever this is between us. I want to stop running from it and find out where it actually goes. His kiss was the answer and the celebration and the promise all at the same time, different from Jakarta's heat or the auction's hunger. This was claiming done with tenderness, possession that asked permission first. His hands framed my face like I was something precious and something dangerous in equal measure. And I opened for him with a sound that absolutely should have embarrassed me and didn't even slightly. When we finally broke apart, both breathing in ragged halves, his smile was pure and complete triumph. He said mine, simply, without apology. I said yours, and I felt the truth of it settle into my bones like it had always been trying to find a way in. The plane touched down just after dawn. Exhaustion hit me like something physical. Daniel guided me through the terminal and into the waiting car, his arm around my waist, the only thing keeping me upright. He murmured sleep. He said he would wake me when we were home. I said home, the word a question. He said the estate. Except somewhere during 3 months of living there, it had stopped feeling like a prison and started feeling exactly like that. Home, I must have drifted because I woke to the car stopping and Daniel's hand on my shoulder. He said we were here. I blinked awake, expecting to see the familiar gates of the estate. Instead, we were still several blocks away, and Leo was standing beside the car with an expression that turned my blood cold in an instant. He said problem. One word, terse. He said the estate had been breached. Armed response. The south perimeter had been penetrated 15 minutes ago. The exhaustion vanished, replaced by adrenaline so sharp it felt like clarity. I asked if it was Marcus. Though I already knew it was impossible, Marcus was in federal custody in Jakarta. Leo said someone Marcus had hired before they took him down. He said Marcus had sent the order from a burner phone at the currency exchange 3 minutes before the police grabbed him. They had been staging the assault for 24 hours. Daniel's voice was absolutely, completely calm. He asked how many. He was already pulling up security feeds on his phone. Figures in tactical gear moved through the gardens with military precision. Leo said 8 confirmed, possibly more. He was already coordinating with the security team. He said they were looking for something specific. They had bypassed the main house entirely and were heading for the east wing, my rooms. I said they were looking for me. Daniel started to say my name. I said no. They were looking for the documentation I had kept, the proof of Marcus's crimes. He must have believed I would bring physical copies back with me. I said I had. I admitted it. Backups of everything. In the safe in my study. Daniel's jaw went tight. He said then we needed to get me far from here. I said no, and I surprised even myself with how firm it was. I said that safe had biometric locks. They couldn't access it without me. If we ran, they would just wait us out and eventually breach it. I said Daniel. I used his name. You're asking me to let them destroy your home because it's safer to run. That's not who you are, and it's not who I am anymore either. Something shifted in his expression, pride mixed with exasperation. He said I was suggesting we engage 8 trained professionals because I had decided to stop running. I said I was suggesting we end this. I turned to Leo. I asked what our actual advantage was. Leo looked between us, clearly caught between protocol and something that looked like respect for the fact that I was asking the right question. Daniel gave him a slight nod. Leo said we knew the estate better than anyone who had ever tried to take it from the outside. And we had remote access to all security systems, every lock, every light, every environmental control. An idea came together all at once. Wild, dangerous. Exactly the kind of thing Daniel would appreciate. I said the East Wing Gallery was climate-controlled for the art, right? Independent HVAC system. Daniel said yes. Slowly, already following where I was going. I said the windows were reinforced to protect against UV damage and potential theft, weren't they? Leo's expression shifted to something that looked almost like approval. He said bulletproof glass, seismically resistant frames. I was thinking out loud now, pieces clicking into place with satisfying precision. I said museums used oxygen deprivation systems to control pests and preserve organic materials. I said if we lowered the oxygen content in that wing below 15%, standard breathing equipment wouldn't compensate fast enough. They would have less than 2 minutes before they lost consciousness. Daniel said that was completely insane. I said it was strategic. I met his eyes. I said it was also non-lethal. They would wake up with headaches and restraints. Not in body bags. He said I had been spending too much time with him, but he was already coordinating with a security team, deploying them to secure the perimeter while we prepared. We approached the estate on foot, using service entrances and the blind spots in the security camera network that the mercenaries would have had no way of knowing existed. The Preed on Dark was our ally, along with our intimate knowledge of every shadow and sightline of that place. He said if this went wrong, I said it wouldn't. I kept my eyes on the path ahead. I said trust me. He said I do, and the words were quiet and absolute. He said that was what terrified him. The mercenaries reached the East Wing gallery exactly as predicted. Their tactical lights cutting through the dark, 8 figures, professionally equipped, moving with the coordination of people who had done this many times before. I whispered now, and I initiated the lockdown protocol. The gallery's reinforced doors slammed shut with hydraulic certainty. The windows engaged their secondary security measures, sealing the space completely. And deep within the mansion's infrastructure, the system began flooding the gallery with nitrogen, enriched air, systematically pushing the oxygen out. The mercenaries understood their mistake within seconds. Weapons aimed at doors that would not move. Attempts to breach the windows resulting in fractured wrists as the glass held without giving. Increasingly frantic radio communication as the reality of their situation became clear. 2 minutes, Leo said, watching his tablet. Oxygen saturation dropping. I made myself watch the feeds as the mercenaries succumbed. First confusion, then panic, then the inevitable loss of consciousness as their bodies were denied what they needed. It wasn't clean, it wasn't comfortable, but it was justice of a particular kind. Daniel counted 7. He asked where the 8th was. The answer came as shattering glass. Not from the gallery, but from the conservatory, where I had worked for months, where all of this had begun to unravel, where I had first started understanding what I was actually capable of. A figure in tactical gear had found an alternate route in, separated from his team. He was heading for the control panel. For the systems I had just used, Daniel moved with that lethal speed I had stopped being surprised by. He stepped between me and the threat, his weapon appearing in his hand with practiced ease, but the mercenary wasn't aiming for him. His weapon tracked toward the control panel. I acted without thinking. My hand slammed down on the emergency override. Every magnetic lock in the mansion disengaged at once, including the gallery door. The mercenary's eyes went wide as he understood what I had done. I had freed his unconscious teammates, but I had also activated every alarm in the building and brought every remaining security measure fully online. The estate itself had become a hunting ground, and we knew it far better than he ever would. Daniel moved, one moment beside me. The next, he had crossed the distance to the mercenary with speed that didn't seem possible. The fight was brief and absolute. Professional soldier versus a man who had spent his entire life surviving in a world where hesitation meant death. The mercenary went down. Daniel secured him with practiced efficiency. Then he turned around and found me standing in the doorway, gripping a bronze sculpture like a club, breathing in ragged gasps. He said he had him, something like amusement flickering through all the adrenaline. I said I know. I lowered the sculpture slowly, my hands shaking now that it was over. I said, but I wasn't going to just watch.